Thanks, Nari. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining, as always. A lot going on in Congress and in Washington, so want to get all your questions as soon as possible. But I'll just start, as always, with a brief overview. We are now about 4 months, a little under 4 months into the new Congress, the new administration, our legislative year. I like to think of it as going from insurrection to infrastructure in just 4 months. So, and I think that's a good trajectory for our country and for all of us, no matter your point of view, I would hope. We've passed one ginormous bill already and are busy preparing another one. And I'm sure we're going to focus a lot of our discussion today on those two bills. But basically, this is all about recovery from a terrible, terrible year, from a horrific catastrophe that befell our country, the COVID pandemic, and rebuilding America, not just so that we patch up the wounds of COVID, but that we take advantage of this crisis to do something big and bold for the country that will be lasting, that we can be proud of for decades to come. I think that's part of our DNA as Americans. We've seen it again and again in our history. After the Great Depression, we had the New Deal, for example, which gave us Social Security and a completely new set of responsibilities that government has had to our people ever since. After the carnage of the Second World War, we built the United Nations, and America became the world leader for prosperity and human rights and freedom and peace. After or during the Cold War, when we faced a daily threat of nuclear annihilation, we took that fear and that anxiety and we used it as motivation to make our country better and stronger, building the interstate highway system and passing the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, putting a man on the moon. And now here we are again. We've lost 500,000 Americans, a horrible, horrible tragedy. But we are trying to take that experience and once again do something big, something bold, something good for the American people. So the COVID relief bill we passed was, yes, a relief bill. It was partly to help all of us get through the final weeks and months of this pandemic, get more shots in arms, get money to our municipal and county governments so that they can keep our services going, obviously unemployment checks and stimulus checks and all of that, but it also tries to do a couple of things that are bigger. For example, the relief bill, the American Rescue Plan, included a proposal that Republicans and Democrats have been making for many years, and that is to greatly increase the child tax credit in our country and to make it fully refundable. Doing this, and it's done, President Biden has signed it, we are told by all the experts, cut child poverty in America in half. That's a big thing we have done just in the last couple of months, and folks can start taking advantage of that now. Second, a lot of us in the current Congress, including me, ran in 2018 on a promise to try to do something about healthcare costs in this country. The American Rescue Plan does something big about healthcare costs. It caps monthly premiums for everybody on the Affordable Care Act individual marketplace to around 8% of their earnings. The typical middle-class family in New Jersey, as a result of this, will save hundreds of dollars a month on their health insurance. So that's something I'm very, very proud of. And now, having done that, we are taking up President Biden's next proposal, his American Jobs Plan, or sometimes called the infrastructure bill, which has now led to a fun and interesting, but ultimately, I think, a relevant debate about how we define infrastructure. This is a bill that is absolutely designed to rebuild America, to rebuild our highways and bridges and rail systems. It'll help to repair and modernize about 20,000 miles of highway in America. It'll fix about 10,000 bridges across the country. It will have a program that I pushed to specifically set aside money for very large infrastructure projects that have national significance, but are too big basically to be funded by existing grant programs. That is for our Gateway program in New Jersey to build that Hudson River tunnel that we desperately need. That's something we are absolutely going to do in this plan. But it doesn't just do, as you have heard in the debate, it doesn't just do highways and bridges and tunnels. It's also a massive investment in broadband infrastructure so that every square inch of every rural area in America will have access to high-speed internet. It is a massive investment in our national electric grid so that we have reliable electricity to every part of this country, and we have more supply as we hook up more and more cars and buses and trucks to electricity, which is another goal of this bill, because what we are trying to do here is not just rebuild Eisenhower's interstate highway system from the 1950s. We're trying to build a new transportation system that is powered by clean energy so that America, not China, not any other country, leads this historic revolution in transportation away from fossil fuels to clean energy. Somebody's going to do that. I want it to be America, and I want New Jersey to lead America in getting that done. So I'm really excited about, I'm excited about this next bill as well. And if you guys have any questions about it, it's obviously big and complicated. There's a lot we're trying to do. I would be delighted to go into more detail. So that is our immediate agenda. We've already done a great deal in terms of economic relief, small businesses, getting healthcare costs down, helping families with kids. Next step is going to be creating a massive amount of jobs, rebuilding America, and modernizing our transportation system so that we lead the world to clean energy. I think that's a pretty good agenda for the first 6 months of this year, and would love to get your questions. And I know you've got questions on a whole bunch of other things, so I've saved a lot of what I would have to say for the Q&A. With that, Nari, let's go to questions and comments.
Great, thanks, Tom. All right, we are now going to begin with a few frequently asked questions that were submitted beforehand. And after that, we will go into live Q&A. If your pre-submitted question was not answered in the FAQ portion, please ask again in the chat feature for it to be answered live today. Just a reminder that if you would like to ask a live question, please use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. Please message me your name, your town you are from, along with your question, and I will add you to the list of questioners. Now would be a great time to start submitting those questions as well. All right, Tom, for your first pre-submitted question, what's your view on how to get HR 1 passed practically?
Thank you so much. So for those who don't know, HR 1 is the bill that we have passed now twice in the House of Representatives to strengthen everything about our democracy in America, everything about the way in which we, the people, choose our leaders, and how our leaders answer back to us. It is a bill, if I could sum it up in the simplest possible terms, it is a bill to make voting easier for us, and a bill that makes it harder for billionaires to buy elections. Those are really the two big parts of the bill. Voting rights, making voting easier in the way we tried to do in New Jersey and a lot of other states for the pandemic, and campaign finance rules, transparency on political donations so the billionaires can't buy elections. It has gone to the Senate now, where its fate is, as many of you have read, very, very uncertain. We had 50 co-sponsors of H.R. 1 in the Senate, so all 50 Democrats at one point were supportive. One of those Democrats is Senator Joe Manchin of Virginia, who is one of our more moderate or conservative Democrats, very, very concerned about moving legislation in a bipartisan way. And he recently said that he would like to see a slightly slimmed down version of H.R. 1, importantly, one that still contains those two big features that I just mentioned. And he would like to see it pass on a bipartisan basis without changing the Senate rules regarding the filibuster. And so that's kind of where this stands. Most of us, when we saw Senator Manchin make that statement, reacted by telling him, good for you, Senator Manchin. If you think you can get if you could get 10 Republican senators to support the key features of this bill, we'd all be willing to compromise to get to that point. I'm always about getting a solution. I'm not about getting 100% of what I want. If I can get 75 or 80% of what I want, I'd be very, very happy. And so it's kind of on Senator Manchin now to see if he can find 10 Republican senators on this bill. I'm a little skeptical he can do it. Happy to give him a chance. If he can't, then I think we're going to see a showdown between voting rights and the filibuster. We're going to have to ask the question whether 40 senators, who in this case probably represent about 20% of the American population, can routinely block any piece of legislation they don't like without even lifting a finger, including legislation that deals with the most sacred right every single American has, and that is to elect our leaders in free and fair elections. So either we get 60 votes or we have a real reckoning with the filibuster.
Great, thank you, Tom. All right, after this next FAQ, we will begin live questioning. Just a reminder to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your question to Tom. All right, Tom, for your next FAQ, what is Congress doing to modernize our immigration system?
Thank you so much. So this is obviously it's a tough, complicated, and controversial issue. And there are a lot of passions out there on every side of it. And yet the solution, I think, is relatively simple, and it's always been before us. And there's always been some bipartisan support for that solution. And I'll tell you basically what I think it is. And it's something that passed the Senate in a very comprehensive form about 8 years ago in 2013, and something we just did in the House of Representatives, though it didn't get a lot of attention. What we just did in the House of Representatives was pass a bill called the Farm Worker Modernization Act. This was a bipartisan bill. We had about 30 Republicans crossing over and joining the Democrats to pass it, which I think was very, very hopeful. And what it does, just for our population of undocumented farm workers, is to give them a very long and difficult pathway to citizenship. Basically, those that have been working in America for at least 14 years or so would be able to apply for green cards and ultimately citizenship if they also pass a background check. So we want to make sure these are folks who have been playing by the rules in every other possible way. At the same time, there's some good changes that our farmers have been asking for to seasonal worker visas to make it easier to bring in folks as they do legally to do these very important jobs that kept food on the tables for American families throughout the pandemic. And then finally, as part of the bargain, there's a requirement that every employer of farm workers use the E-Verify system, which is an existing system that's not mandatory, unfortunately, to make sure that the workers they hire do in fact have a legal right to work. So this would expand the number of people who have that legal right to work, but it would also ensure that employers actually follow the law and only employ those people. And again, we got, there wasn't a lot of controversy over this, as in the way there is over a lot of other immigration issues. Passed the House, and I think we have a decent shot of getting it through the Senate. The larger solution is basically this bill, but applied to the much larger population, not just farm workers. This is the basic deal. Treat people humanely. Recognize that it is a great strength of our country that so many people want to become American citizens. So many people want to become American taxpayers. So many people even want to come here and serve in our military. It's something no other country could say, like the United States, certainly not China. But at the same time, we want immigration to be legal. We want to incentivize people going through the process. And so that's what I think we can do if we just take this principle one step further. Give folks who are here a pathway to citizenship that's difficult to get through, but that at least provides an option. And at the same time, require that all businesses, not just farms, use the E-Verify system to make sure that the workers they're hiring are in fact legally allowed to work in the United States. So there will be a larger immigration bill that we will consider. I fear that there will be a lot more politics around that bill, because there are a lot of folks in this country who are trying to demonize immigrants and to make this the thing that we should be afraid of, because they don't want to be talking about all the good work we're doing on jobs and healthcare and infrastructure and bringing this country back. I get that, but I think we've got to have the guts to do for immigration writ large what we have just done for the farm worker population. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. All right, now we're going to begin our live Q&A portion. Again, if you have a live question for Tom, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. I will let you know when you are next up to ask your question live, so you will have warning before I call on you as well. All right, first up, we have Jumana from Hackettstown. Jumana, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you, Congressman, for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
My question is about the child tax credit. I believe it's $300 per child 6 and older. Do we get that automatically, or do we have to fill out something? How does that work?
This will be an unsatisfying answer to you, but stand by. They're working it out.
All right.
We're hoping it's automatic. Let me put it that way. That's why they're asking. The advice we're getting is don't tell people yet that they need to, like, if you've already filed your taxes, we're not supposed to tell you to amend your tax return yet. The guidance I've gotten is just to ask people to stand by for now. Ideally, it will be automatic.
Okay.
And remember, it's fully refundable, right? So it doesn't matter how much tax you owe. Everybody up to, if it's a family, mom and dad and kids, then it's up to $150,000 a year. Everybody gets $3,000 per child, or $3,600 for kids under 6 years old. So, and hopefully the system will work out so that most people just get it automatically. But stay in touch with our office. If you haven't seen a good answer to that in a couple of weeks, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Congressman.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jumana. And I know many other people will have questions similar to that. We are holding a Q&A session tomorrow with an IRS representative. So if you have a question similar to Jumana's about the child tax credit, maybe about a stimulus check, you may be able to have that question answered in tomorrow's event. So please RSVP by visiting malinowski.house.gov/upcoming-events. You will see IRS representative Q&A. Click on that RSVP link and you will be sure to get a Zoom link to that event tomorrow. All right, next up, we have John from Flanders. John, can you hear us? John from Flanders.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't find unmute. Thank you, Congressman. Yeah, my question is, definitely support what you're saying about the immigration. Maybe you could give us all just a refresher. There are current laws for immigration and asylum, as I understand it, and there's funding for that each year. There's quotas in some cases for types of workers, be it either temporary workers or educational visas. But what is the Congress and administration going to do now with these other people that are coming, which, hey, we want to help them, we want them here, but there simply isn't the resources identified, and there's not a system in place currently to deal with the surge of these people. So I don't know if you could help qualify some of the things that are already in place and what need to be added.
Yeah. And sorry, before just the link that Nuri just mentioned on the tax seminar, she just posted that in the chat. So if you're interested, just go there and click that. So in answer to your question, John, yeah, there are a lot of different avenues for people to come here legally, right? Including various seasonal worker visas, visas for people of sort of exceptional skills, all the way down to, summer, kids coming to work at resorts for the summer, or farm workers spending the good part of the year doing agricultural work. There's also a refugee program, which there's an annual quota that is set by the president that went basically to zero under President Trump. But ever since President Reagan, we've been taking between like 50 and 150,000 refugees from around the world a year. These are people who don't come and show up at our doorstep. They may go to a refugee camp like in Syria or in Burma or the Congo or Vietnamese boat people is when this started. And then they're interviewed overseas, and the United States takes some and other countries take some. President Biden has promised to restore that program, and with a quota of around 120,000 people this year. And then there's the asylum process, which is, I think, what your question focuses on. Asylum is basically the principle that we've had in our laws for decades, ever since we turned back Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany before World War II. I'm sure you all have read the horrible stories of boats of Jewish refugees coming to the United States and being told, no, go back, right? Many of those people then did not survive. So the principle of asylum is basically that if somebody shows up at our doorstep and says, I have a credible fear of persecution, if you send me home, I'll be killed, I'll be tortured, then we don't have to take them, but we have to hear them out. That's a legal process. You can't just say, we're not doing that anymore. And that's the painful part, right? Because what happens if there is a surge and huge numbers of people come? There has to be some mechanism for sorting through those cases and for treating people humanely while their cases are heard. And there's never been a good, perfect, fully satisfying answer to those questions. You mentioned the surge, and there's absolutely a huge surge right now at the southern border, but it's not unprecedented. If you look back over the last 20 years, we have these surges usually right around now, early spring, every couple of years. There was a huge surge in 2019 under President Trump. There were a couple under President Obama. The biggest ones in recent memory were under President Bush in the mid-2000s. And we've managed. It's never pretty, it's never easy, but there's a whole network. I've been to the southern border. I went to El Paso a couple of years ago. There's a whole network of public and private organizations, a lot of church-based organizations that work to try to absorb the folks who are released into the community, as they say, basically into those border communities, while they wait for their asylum hearings to be heard. And then, of course, there's a whole system for trying to accommodate younger children who come without older family members, but who may have, and usually do have, an older family member already living in the United States. So one approach is just not to let anybody in. One approach is to push every single person, including children, back into Mexico. Most of these people are not Mexican, right? They don't belong in Mexico. If they're pushed back there, they're vulnerable to gangs, to traffickers. It's a really, really cruel answer to this problem that has never even stopped the surges, and I think is inconsistent with our legal obligations to at least give people a chance to ask for asylum. And so President Biden decided, all right, at least the unaccompanied children, we're not going to push them back. The adults mostly still do get pushed back, and the results are unsatisfying, but I think at least for now manageable. The final part of this, and sorry to go on so long, but you asked an important question with a complicated answer. The final part of this is that we need to go to the root source of the crisis, which is not at our border. It's in Central America. It's in countries that are plagued by chronic gang violence, corruption, poverty, natural disasters. It's not easy for families to decide to risk their lives to travel 1,000 miles to come to the United States, where they risk being pushed back anyway. Something that most families are only going to do if the situation they're dealing with at home is absolutely desperate, because it's a very desperate thing to make that journey. And so the final thing we got to do here is to make a real effort working with these Central American countries to try to deal with those conditions. And that's something President Biden has proposed. It's something I will support. And over time, I think we'll make things better. Won't eliminate the problem. Nothing ever does, but it will make it better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Next up, we have David from Bud Lake. David, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hey, David.
Representative Malinowski, currently we spend more money in real dollars than on our defense budget than we ever have. It's about 50% more than it was during the 80s at the height of the Cold War. President Biden's proposed defense budget is much in line with the defense budgets the last 4 years. Do you support this level of defense spending? And if you don't, or is there any way we can get this out of control portion of our budget brought back in, considering how much defense contractors are burrowed into every state and by design?
Every state and every congressional district, actually. We still have some weapon systems that are literally made, like they can point to some component part made in just about every congressional district in the country for obvious reasons. So look, this is something Biden obviously has not gotten under control or made a significant effort to get under control. And I'm a little patient with that because it's got to be done responsibly. And at this stage, he's probably only got about 2 or 3 civilian officials even confirmed for jobs at the Defense Department. Everybody else is a career civil servant or military officer holdover from the past. My own view is, and I'm actually a very strong pro-defense Democrat. I do believe that the United States needs to maintain a military that is without equal in the world. That the purpose of our military is to avoid wars rather than to fight wars, and the way to avoid wars is to be significantly stronger than any potential adversary. So I totally buy into that principle. But at the same time, there's tremendous waste in our military procurement. We've had things like the F-35 program, for example, this modern fighter that just costs astronomical amounts of money for a plane that turns out to be so sophisticated that our military doesn't want to use it, except under very, very rare circumstances. And turns out what they needed was a workhorse. What they needed was something, not the super souped up Lexus, but the Honda Civic that you actually drive every single day. And there are a lot of programs like that. The aircraft carrier program, that was like, the Navy just for decades had this mindset that the aircraft carrier is the symbol of your power and your strength. It has been since World War II. Turns out, the Chinese have missiles that can pretty much take out any aircraft carrier we have in the Pacific. And so, in addition to being incredibly expensive, it's not really the thing that makes us superior to any other potential adversary. So we need a lot of new thinking at the Pentagon. We need a Congress that can encourage that rather than just go in for the contracts that create jobs in districts. It's incredibly hard to do. I'm hoping that in their second budget, when they've had time to really dig into this, the Biden administration will help us do that. And I'll be encouraging it. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, David. Let's go to George from Franklin Township. George, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I was wondering exactly what steps would need to be taken to eliminate the filibuster.
To eliminate the filibuster?
Yes.
So the Senate sets its own rules by a majority of the senators voting. So to eliminate the filibuster or to change any other rule of the Senate, all you need is 51 senators or 50 senators plus the vice president in case of a tie. So technically, that's the answer to your question. Now, politically, that means, Democrats now have 50 votes, 50 senators, and the vice president. So Democrats could choose to end the filibuster if all of them agreed, but they don't all agree because at least two Democratic senators, Senator Manchin of West Virginia and Sinema of Arizona, are opposed to eliminating the filibuster. I think the question on everybody's mind is, would they be open to reforming or changing the filibuster in ways that make it harder to use? So for example, you could go back to the days when Mr. Smith went to Washington. You remember that old movie where any senator could filibuster a bill, but you had to really mean it, enough to stand on the floor of the Senate and talk and talk and talk and talk, holding the floor, preventing that vote from happening, even if it means, standing up all night and reading the phone book. The advantage of that is you could still do it, but you wouldn't do it routinely on every single bill that you don't like. And that's what's gotten out of hand with the filibuster. Yeah, it's part of Senate tradition, but it's only been in the last 10, 15 years or so where it's been used in a way that basically means you can't pass even a routine bill in the Senate unless you have 60 votes in advance. So that's one idea. Just make it a lot harder to use, and so we'll see. Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema will have to agree, and what we will do between now and then is we will make a good faith effort. Democrats will make, I hope, a good faith effort to reach across the aisle to find reasonable compromises on issues like H.R. 1, voting rights, on gun violence prevention, on spending on jobs and infrastructure. And by reasonable compromises, I don't mean like 20 or 30% of what Joe Biden's asking for, but more like 70 or 80%, given that he won the election, and so did, Democrats like me in the House and Senate. And if we can't do that, then I think there's a really strong case for Senator Manchin and Sinema to at least vote to amend the filibuster. If we can get that kind of bipartisan buy-in, great. I would prefer that. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thanks, George, and thanks, Tom. Again, if you would like to ask Tom a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We have just a few more questions to go, so we are more than welcome to take your question during this time. Let's go to Bill from Phillipsburg. Bill, can you hear us?
Again, hello, Congressman. Thank you again for hosting this event.
Sure.
The question has to do with something that's been in the paper lately. Bill Gates has just acquired or is now the largest farmland owner in the U.S. And does that give you any kind of pause about how one person can dictate the health and welfare of rural food producing lands?
So I didn't know that, but I can tell you I do think we need stronger enforcement of antitrust rules in America. What you just mentioned is a example of a bigger phenomenon, right? Where we have increasingly a handful of mega billionaires controlling huge sectors of the American economy. Look at Amazon for example, not to mention Google and Facebook and these tech giants that basically dominate social media and the internet. These are all companies that were built up by corporate leaders who had great ideas and built great companies and employed a lot of people, and that's capitalism, and I'm all for it. But it is not healthy capitalism when a tiny number of people basically own half the wealth in the country, where a single company completely dominates the marketplace, as Amazon does, for example. That's not the capitalism that produces healthy competition and innovation and positive change. So I think I'll have to look into the specific example that you just raised, but as a general matter, I think we need rules in this country, antitrust rules, tax policy that that discourages this total consolidation of wealth and power in very, very few hands. Thanks, Bill.
You.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Tom. We just have one more question on deck. So again, please submit your questions for the congressman to answer. And this is one that someone asked to have read aloud for them. Tom, can you give us an update on salt?
I assume you mean the state and local tax deduction, not the seasoning. As all of us from New Jersey know, the SALT deduction, the state and local tax deduction, was part of our tax code since forever. In fact, since the beginning of the federal income tax in the 19th century, our ability to deduct our state and local taxes from our federal returns, until it was capped at $10,000 per taxpayer by the 2017 tax bill. One of the worst bills I think Congress has passed in modern times. I'm doing everything in my power to try to get the SALT deduction back. I think this was a deliberate hit on states like New Jersey, a way of punishing us for, heck, I don't know, either voting the wrong way in national elections or just for the choice that we have made as New Jerseyans to pay a little bit more in taxes than other states so that we can have the best schools in America. So what am I doing? I have said, alongside several of my colleagues from states like New Jersey, that I can't vote for a bill this year. As much as I like what Biden is doing, I can't vote for a bill that has significant tax impact on you guys, on individual taxpayers, unless we get relief on the SALT deduction. So we sent a letter to Janet Yellen, who's the Secretary of the Treasury. I've personally spoken to her about this, and made clear we absolutely need to see something on SALT this year if any of our individual taxes are going to go up, even at the very, very top, which is one of Biden's proposals, that the top individual rate on people making more than $400,000 a year go up from 37 to 39%. Like even that, I've said, I'm not going to have it unless we do something on SALT. And something could be fully restoring the SALT deduction. It could be something more targeted to the folks I think who need the deduction the most, our middle class families. I'm open to all kinds of different solutions, but that's a conversation we will need to have this year. And the more we can move this Biden legislation, the more of it goes through the House and the Senate to the president for signature, the more leverage I'm going to have to be able to insist on this. So stay tuned. It's not going to be easy, but we do have a real shot.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
All right, we are going to go back to David from Bud Lake.
Representative Malinowski, on the night of January 6th and the January 7th, 139 members of the House of Representatives acted as the political arm of the insurrection. Mm-hmm. Why haven't they been removed from Congress via the 14th Amendment?
So the 139 members you're referring to are the ones who basically voted with the rioters. Even after, at the end of that day, as we were literally cleaning the blood off the floor, we went back into the House chamber. We resumed the debate on certifying the election, and we voted to certify it. And there were 139 members who basically stood with the rioters to say that Joe Biden's victory should not be certified. It was outrageous. It clearly marked them as either believing what the people who stormed the Capitol believed, or as too cowardly to stand up to them. But as to your specific question, whether they should be expelled or not, I would not personally go that far, and I'll tell you why. Because all of us basically that day were asked to vote on this, right? It was a legitimate vote. It was a legitimate process that we go through every 4 years when a presidential election happens. All of us have a button, yes or no. And it's hard for me to imagine a situation where members of Congress are told, here's a proposition, you either vote yes or you vote no. And if you vote no, you'll be expelled from the House. You see what I mean? If voting a particular way is so bad that you should be expelled for the House for it, then that's not a vote we should even have, right? So what I feel is that we should be using censure and potentially ethics penalties for those members who, in addition to voting with the rioters, actually colluded with them potentially, who spoke to the crowd and said, basically egging them on. There were several, I think, who were in that position, and I'm actually a sponsor of censure resolutions against a couple of those guys. As you know, we basically kicked one member, Marjorie Taylor Greene, off of her committees for a variety of comments that she had made. But ultimately, I think, the punishment for members of Congress behaving outrageously is people shouldn't vote for them. And we're going to have to win this argument with the American people that what happened on that day was totally beyond the pale, totally un-American, totally criminal, and that any politician who stood with those people in any way does not deserve to hold a position of respect and authority in this country. But it's going to have to be the American people making that decision. Thanks.
Thank you. We still have a few, we do have a few more questions rolling in, so let's try to get to everyone we can. Next, let's go to Liz from Flanders. Liz, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Liz.
Hey, I just wanted to see if you could elaborate on the Gateway Tunnel news that you tweeted earlier today.
Yep. So this is pretty simple. We're going to build the tunnel. To elaborate on it, you all know how important the Hudson River Tunnel is and the Gateway project in general. Our economy, not just northern New Jersey, but the eastern seaboard depends on that connection between New Jersey and New York. We got 2 tracks under the Hudson River that carry all of the passenger rail traffic through a 110-year-old tunnel that's not going to be with us for very much longer. We desperately need to build a new one. And then when we build a new one, we can repair the old one. We'll end up with 4 tracks, which means not just safety and reliability and speed, but vastly, well, doubling the capacity, which will allow us to add trains, have more trains, particularly on the Raritan Valley line, that go direct to New York, where you don't have to change in Newark Penn Station. And then, you know, ultimately my dream, and this is not like the next couple of years, I don't want to raise expectations, but ultimately my dream is restoring that railway line, basically extending the Raritan Valley line out to Phillipsburg, connecting up with trains in Pennsylvania. So that's the goal. That's why this is so important. What we got last year, despite resistance from the Trump administration, was funding and approval for the first stage of this, the Portal Bridge, the bridge that leads to the tunnel. We now have multiple commitments from the Biden administration, including Secretary Pete Buttigieg to me and other members of our delegation, that they will build the Hudson River Tunnel too. Today, a couple days ago, they confirmed something that Buttigieg said to me in a hearing a while ago, that they will be completing the environmental impact review for the tunnel by the end of May. They gave us a concrete date. In the Trump administration, the environmental review was buried. It was more than 2 years overdue. So this is something we asked them to fix, get that done, because it's a necessary step. Once that's done, there's still a couple of items on my checklist with them, just administrative steps that they have to take to get the tunnel qualified for federal grants. And then it's on Congress to continue to fund it. And in the jobs and infrastructure bill, as I mentioned, we are creating a new grant program, basically, that is designed for extremely large and nationally significant projects like Gateway, to facilitate the funding that's going to come over the next few years. So I'm very optimistic right now that Gateway is on track and that it will happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. Next up, we have Len from Stewartsville. Len, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hi, Congressman. I was just wondering if you could update us on your efforts and others to curb in the social networking companies like Facebook and stuff.
Yeah.
And they use their algorithms to send out, misleading information to targeted groups, and we all know the results of that. I know you've been working on that.
Yeah, I have been, and we had the question from David on the January 6th riot, and I think this is really the most important question about what happened that day. How is it that thousands of our fellow Americans could come to Washington, D.C. and assault the United States Capitol and police officers and believe sincerely as they all did, that what they were doing was totally normal, you know, that they were defending the Constitution and the building and our democracy. How could they believe that it was a normal thing to do? And the best answer I can give you is that they, like all of us, we're all susceptible to this. We all get most of our information now from social media. It's filtered through our social media pages, right? Even if it's from a newspaper or Fox News or the New York Times, it's coming to us through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And these big companies decide what shows up in our news feeds based on what they think we want to see, what they think we want to hear. They give us, each and every one of us, an individually tailored version of reality. If you're politically conservative, you're going to get stuff that pushes you more and more and more in that direction. If you're politically liberal, you're going to get stuff that pushes you more and more and more in that direction. And the result is all of us become more and more divided from each other. We become more extreme in our beliefs, more angry, more fearful, because all the information we're getting that's being fed to us is literally designed to play on those emotions until, you know, you get these kinds of extreme actions. So I've got a bill that takes on the legal immunity that these big companies like Facebook currently enjoy. Basically, you cannot hold them accountable for anything that a user like us posts on their websites, even if they are writing these algorithms that decide which of those posts show up in other people's news feeds, even if they are promoting, amplifying, recommending that content, even the extreme content. And so my bill would take away that immunity if content that they amplify with their algorithms leads to real world violence, like an act of terrorism or violent hate crime, like what we saw committed on January 6th. Then victims could sue them and courts would weigh all the issues, including the First Amendment. But the companies, I think, would have an incentive to change the way they design their networks so that there is less amplification of content that pits us against each other and that leads to violence. Thanks. And what will happen? I got a lot of co-sponsors for my bill. There's a lot of interest out there. We've gotten amazing endorsements from experts and organizations all over the country. And my expectation, based on talking to committee chairs and so forth in the House, is that the bill will be brought up in the Energy and Commerce Committee this year and likely become part of a larger package of bills dealing with social media later this year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Thanks, Tom. All right, this next question is our last question. If you have anything you would like to address or ask Tom, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Other than that, Carol, we have Carol from Wharton. Can you hear us, Carol?
Yes, I can.
Hey, Carol.
I should be on, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, okay. My question is, thanks, Tom. Is there any update you can give us on the healthcare package, and will we have a path to single payer? Hopefully.
So the healthcare package I mentioned is already enacted. So what that does, it's not single payer, right? It's not reforming the system. It deals with the costs of people who are on the Affordable Care Act, on Obamacare. And as many of you know, the big complaint about the Affordable Care Act is that it wasn't very affordable, particularly for folks on the individual marketplace. If you had to go out and shop for your own health insurance, unless you qualified for those generous subsidies, as low-income people did, it was pretty darn expensive. And so what we did was to cap monthly payments for everyone at 8% of income with subsidies to make up for that. And as it turns out, you know, if you're, you know, a couple with 2 kids in New Jersey, you make $100,000 a year. You're going to save, I don't have the tables in front of me, but like $300 a month. A 75-year-old couple, sorry, a 60-year-old couple making $75,000 a year, no kids. Right now, their rates are just through the roof, like well over $1,000 a month, would save over $1,000 a month under that bill. So it doesn't reform the healthcare system, just makes it significantly more affordable for people to take part in the ACA, which should boost coverage, by the way, right? Because cost is something that is a bar for people to get health insurance. Beyond that, after we do the infrastructure and jobs bill, there's another major bill that the administration wants us to consider that's going to deal with education, healthcare, workforce issues. And that, I think, would be an opportunity to do more on healthcare. As you know, I'm very much in favor of giving every American the choice, the freedom to buy into a public option like Medicare if they want. I've never been for forcing everybody to do it. I've never been for eliminating private insurance, but I've been for a public option that gives people another choice and that creates more competition so that prices come down further.
How about drug prices?
Yes, we're talking about that as well for that stage. There's huge interest in doing a drug pricing bill. Many of us ran on that, and you know, it, like everything, I always try to be honest when things are complicated and hard, and this is definitely in that category. But I also, my philosophy of being in Congress is that I prefer to be caught trying, and I will support us trying to do big and bold and complicated things. And in the end, if we're successful half the time, that's a lot better than if we didn't try at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. With that, that's all the questions we have for this afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to Tom for some closing remarks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you,
Nuri. Great questions as always. Thank you, everybody. There's a lot more to come. It's nice to be able to talk about what we have already done. Right, when I first ran for Congress, it was all kind of hopes and dreams and promises, and now I actually get to report back to you on legislation that we have enacted, on programs that are working right now to help people in our community. That's a huge incentive for me and many of my colleagues to try to get more done by the end of this year. And I've given you a little taste, a little preview of what some of our priorities will be in that effort. I hope you know that my priorities come from your priorities, and that's why I do as many of these sessions as possible, and always encourage you to join and bring friends and people who support what I'm doing, people who are critical of what I'm doing. I really love to bring these groups together to have a real discussion of the substance behind the legislation and the work that we're doing in Washington, D.C. So thanks again for joining, and I look forward to our next opportunity to come together. Bye-bye, everybody.